that brings us to our very last session here. Our topic or theme today has been an outward look towards the future, and we wanted to end on a positive note and to hear success stories and things that are interesting and unique about groundwater districts and their partners and things they've done. So to moderate this session, I'm very pleased to introduce to you Ronnie Hopper of the High Plains District. Let's welcome him.
Good morning. My name is Ronnie Hopper. I'm a lifetime resident of Hale County, Texas. I live near a small town called Petersburg, Texas, northeast of Lubbock. And interestingly enough, I'm living on the same farm that my parents were living on when I was born. So you might say that I haven't gotten very far away from home. I asked Sarah yesterday if the moderator would be allowed to make any comments, and she said, well, very little. And I finally squeezed 3 minutes out of her, and I'm going to spend that first minute in saying that I really hadn't been publicly involved in water but for about 5 years. But I found it very interesting. I've come to many of the TAG meetings, and I have to say without reservation that every meeting that I've attended has been better than the last. And I think, Sarah, you and Beth have taken a good organization and made it even better, and I expect in the future that it'll become even greater. We know the water world in Texas is becoming more sophisticated day by day, and as directors and managers of individual water districts, we have to become more sophisticated as well. So I want to take the last 2 minutes of my time and say a little bit about the High Plains of Texas. The High Plains of Texas is around 150 miles wide, and it's 200 miles long. It's a large, large area. And a lot of times as residents up there, we speak of it as the North Plains and the South Plains. The South Plains, where I reside, is a good irrigation area that was really flourished in the drought of the 50s when irrigation came into that area. And as you know, the amount of production of water is decreasing year by year. And as you well know too, agriculture uses more than 90% of that water. But I look at it that way, and I understand that times change, and we have to recognize that. Because the worst thing that you can say when something happens is, I didn't see it coming. Well, we see it coming, and we understand that, but I'm very thankful that of the thousands of children that were educated from the benefit of that water and its use in agricultural production, for the hundreds of thousands of middle-class lifestyles that have been achieved. So, you know, those things are things that I'm very thankful for. I want to tell you just a little bit of why the North and South Plains, or the High Plains of Texas, is unique. When you think about population, I bet not many of you understand that that area only contains around 1 million people, while there are counties in the state of Texas that have that population alone. So the population's different. We even have we're in a different electric grid. We're in SPP, and the rest of the state's in ERCOT. And that was done through electric deregulation somewhere around 2000. So the South Plains is mostly cotton. The North Plains, which is really actually considered somewhere from south of Amarillo on up to the Oklahoma border, is a vast area that became an irrigation area perhaps 20 years after the South Plains. So it is behind, or it's earlier in its generation. There's vast oil deposits, vast resources, lots of cattle up there. It's a wonderful place to live, and becoming a good cotton area, or a great cotton area, since Texas furnishes 25% of the production of the United States cotton. So there's great resources there. And if you ever stop to think what makes a great nation, obviously that great nation has to have resources. But yet you can look around the world and know that there are many poor nations that are sitting on top of great resources. So a nation survives and flourishes not only from the vastness of its natural resources, but it also survives and excels from human resource. And we have a great human resource on the North Plains. If you look at USGS, NRCS, who does a fantastically dedicated job. We've got Texas Tech, Texas A&M, and a host of others, and including the water districts up there that are doing their job. And that's what we're going to focus on today. With that, I'd like to introduce Kirk Welch from North Plains District, and he's got something really exciting to tell you that's really worthwhile.
Well, thank you, Ronnie. Start out by pat your neighbor on the back because you're still here. That's awesome. It's a pretty good looking crowd at this point. Happy to see everyone. I do want to start off too, just a little intro just to say that it's really an honor for me to get to be here and get to speak to this group. I have once or maybe twice before, but it's a real honor, especially because I don't know how many of these I've been to. This is the 7th. I think I've been to most, but maybe not all of them. And I love what Jakob Vind said when he said, well, I'm probably the dumbest person in the room. I felt like that when I came to my first TAG meeting because it was my introduction to the water world, much less groundwater. And so I can say safely today, I kind of still feel that way because not that I haven't learned anything, but everybody else is continuing to progress and learn a lot too. So it's a great opportunity to be a part of this group and especially to get to talk about this program because I'm really proud to have gotten to be a part of it as well. So all that for introduction's sake, what you see on the screen there is the North Plains Groundwater Conservation District. All are part of 8 counties, the top 8 counties of the Panhandle. And so those are our counties. Just think, yep, there we go. Those are our counties, and that's where it goes. That's where it fits. So it's about 7,500 square miles, about 1 million acres of irrigated land, and that's what we'll get into. But just really quick, the mission statement is maintaining our way of life through conservation, protection, and preservation of our groundwater resources. We'll be referring to, or I'll be referring to the mission a little bit as we go, but important also in this slide is that the background of that picture out to here, this is our North Plains Water Conservation Center. So it's a demonstration farm where these strategies, these techniques and practices can actually be demonstrated to anybody who wants to come by and check it out. But ultimately that was designed for growers to actually be able to see the practices in application before they make a commitment to actually do something. They can see it happening. So we'll be referring to the Water Conservation Center. It is the site for many of our demonstrations and our educational offerings. So this slide, probably don't have to tell you guys what this is, but it is the Ogallala Aquifer, and that map actually represents the levels of depletion that are happening in the aquifer. We've all probably seen this several times, but of note are the red parts, and those are the places of highest depletion. And we can see southwest Kansas, and we can see the South Plains we were talking about, but here we are in the North Plains, and obviously we're red there too, and there's quite a bit of depletion there. This is the July U.S. Drought Monitor, and at that point, our district was abnormally dry. Over the last 6 weeks, we've gotten some rain and have actually moved out of any sort of drought. We've moved into just basically regular conditions, normal conditions. Unfortunately, that's not the case for much of the rest of the state, but we're certainly thankful for that. So we have this mission and we have the diminishing resource, so how are we to accomplish that mission? These are some of the ways. In 2009, the board passed rules that would reduce the allowable production limit from 2 acre-feet per acre per surface acre owned to 1.5 acre-feet gradually over a number of years. That was reduced. The board was also active in developing these agricultural conservation education programs, specifically, as I said, agricultural demonstrations. And so our board really felt it was important not to just have the stick, have the rules, but to actually demonstrate how you can make that happen, since we are a highly irrigated area. And then to continue to promote water conservation across all the user groups. It's while agriculture is a major focus, we have a lot of folks who aren't involved in ag who are a part of our district and stakeholders, and so through a variety of programs, we actually reach out to those folks with conservation education as well. So this is just a quick rundown of some of those programs. Starting in 2012, in 2010, we started the 212 program, which was the first of the demonstrations. Here, I will go ahead and mention the Texas Water Development Board, and they'll come up regularly in the discussion as they have supported almost every conservation effort that we've been involved in over the years. But so the 212 was supported by the Water Development Board. The 200 stands for 200 bushels of corn to be raised on 12 inches of irrigation. And so that's where it got its name. And that was really sort of coincided with the Texas High Plains Initiative for Strategic and Innovative Irrigation Management and Conservation. We could have made that title a little longer, I suppose, but felt like maybe we would stop there at that point. Covered all the bases. But that is an important cooperative effort that included High Plains, Underground Water Conservation District, Texas Tech University, and it was a coalition of the Texas Alliance of Water Conservation down in Floyd and Hale counties. And so what that did, I mean, it allowed us to go in as a unit and successfully secure a grant from the NRCS, a SIG grant, but it also allowed those two major red areas to come together in demonstrations that would help the growers be more efficient with their water and ultimately make a difference long term. Right after actually coinciding timing-wise, the efficient, profitable irrigation in corn was a cooperative effort between the district and another of our great partners, Texas A&M AgriLife, and that basically showed much of the same thing that we were trying to demonstrate with 212, except it worked with producers that even had larger water capacity. What we've in some cases found, well, if you have more water capacity, it actually gives you more flexibility in scheduling your irrigations, and so there's really quite a bit of opportunity for water savings, even at higher yields that are possible with higher water capacity. So some interesting things came out of the what they called the EPIC program, the Efficient Profitable Irrigation in Corn. And let's see, the 345 program just wrapped up this year. It was an extension of the 212 demonstration, focusing on all the strategies that you can use, but specifically at certain irrigation capacities, 3 gallons per minute, 4 gallons per minute, 5 gallons per minute. These demonstrations began and were really coordinated and driven by very much the guru of irrigation in the Panhandle and in the High Plains, Leon New. And so Leon's idea of the 345 was that he felt like at these lower capacities, and based on the requirements to irrigate at those lower capacities, there could be some savings that that could even be applied if you had higher capacity. And so that has borne itself out. Leon is working on our final report on that as we speak. Might actually be in the office when I get back. So looking forward to seeing that. And then finally down there, our master irrigator, which is what we're going to really focus on today. The other side of the list are all these other outreach programs that have nothing specifically to do with agriculture. Our water festivals for fourth graders, 800 to 900 fourth graders that we get to interact with over a 3-day period and visit 3 different towns, and so that's a exciting outreach for us. Our fifth grade WaterWise, where we work together with Resource Action programs. I don't know if those guys are here or not. I haven't seen them yet, but a great program that gets the parents involved in the whole process, and most of you are probably familiar with it. And then more stuff that we do just to be involved. Our summer showers is working with municipalities and distributing conservation tools through the municipalities. And so bottom line is we're trying to cover all those bases. Ultimately, irrigation is the largest user of water in our area. It's 95% in the North Plains District, north of the Canadian River. So it's a big deal, and the reason most of our focus is there is because obviously that's where we can make the most impact. So the irrigation math, as it breaks down, 1 million irrigated acres, if we can reduce that by 3 inches, which those demonstration programs, the 212, 345, have shown that compared to traditional irrigation techniques and processes, you absolutely can save 3 inches. Some in the front, some in the back of the season generally, and this is with corn. This is corn-focused demonstration. The possibility of saving 250,000 acre-feet of water annually. Just to put that into perspective, that is roughly the amount of water used in San Antonio in a year. So that's annual savings, and so significant. And obviously that's the reason for the focus. So as I said, 2010 we started the 212 program as really the first of our agricultural conservation demonstrations. Basically it's growers sharing with growers. Anything that they found that works, we put that together into a system. I say we. Leon knew, and the experts that we had working on this program put this together into a system of strategies, technologies, techniques, cutting edge stuff, and tried and true methods, but just with a little bit different approach and more focus on them. So honestly, it's not a surprise. We found that showing growers what they've done is much more effective than the government or academia telling farmers how to farm. They want to hear from the guy who has skin in the game and it has something to lose or to gain by using one of these technologies. So that goes forward through the rest of our demonstrations is a grower-to-grower connection for sure. So the Master Irrigator was born really as a natural extension of the other demonstrations, the 212, which, as I said, was supported by the Water Development Board, but then also funding through NRCS. It was a natural extension because as the board talked about, well, what do we do to make progress in this area? We've demonstrated for a long time. We've demonstrated basically 7 years. We need to move from demonstration to adoption, and that was the idea of the Master Irrigator program. How to move from demonstration to adoption? Well, the biggest obstacle in that is just a comfort level with the technology or the practice or the strategy. If it's something new, then obviously the growers were not necessarily comfortable with that. So the idea was an intensive training that would instill a certain level of comfort with all these ideas before actually having to put them into practice. And then through our partnership with NRCS, then we were able to actually offer not a lot of money, but some incentive money to help them put those things in the field. So these are important partners, and as I said, Water Development Board, did not actually directly work with the Master Irrigator program, but built the foundation through all the other demonstrations that have led to it. So I think that's probably enough of an intro, and I should be ready to run the video.
Hi, I'm Steve Walther. I'm the General Manager of the North Plains Groundwater Conservation District, and we're located in the northern Texas Panhandle. Our district's about 7,500 square miles in size, and over the last 10 years, we've done more demonstration projects in trying to show producers different methods of irrigated agriculture.
So we were always looking for ways to slow the process down, conserve water, get people to cut back and do it in a way that is not going to affect their businesses or these little communities that are around us.
In our Master Irrigator program, we have 20 some odd things that the instructors teach our producers over 4 days, which makes up approximately 24 hours.
So we developed basically 4 sessions, going all the way from soil health and residue management to systems, irrigation scheduling.
I'm currently employed with the City of Cactus, Texas as their wastewater superintendent, farm manager. The information that we're learning here will better allow us to keep that land viable so that it can be used as an industrial water discharge plus an agricultural process.
Everyone that completed the survey said, yes, I picked up something I plan on implementing.
At the farm, I have 6 supervisors who work under me that I manage. So everything I learned here, I'm going to take on to those guys. It will save us. We're not going to use as much water and get the same or better yields.
We need to continue to search and bring in people that have new ideas, get growers that have been through these programs, that have a lot of knowledge themselves, that they continue to stay involved and bring ideas to us that we can implement them and just hopefully keep this thing going.
So that was the video that was made as part of the Texas Environmental Excellence Award that the district received for the Master Irrigator program in 2018. Always nice to be recognized. We felt like, and the board felt like this was the right thing to be doing, but nice to have someone else show that they agree, especially the governor's office thinking that we're on track. So feeling good about that. The couple of different people that were seen in that video, obviously Steve Walther. Most of you probably know Steve, general manager and driver of a lot of these programs. But our current board president, Harold Grawl, was in there, and also Steve Amison, who is a rock star among economics teachers with Texas A&M AgriLife. Actually, recently retired from Texas A&M AgriLife, but really an expert at putting together educational programs. And so much of the success of the program can be attributed to Steve's expertise. But we talked about the program just a little bit. It's a 4-day intensive program. I'm going to run fairly quickly through these slides of the content. But just to give you an overview, those are the 4 actual categories that go with each of the days. So a day on agronomics, a day on irrigation scheduling, a day on systems and special topics, the cool stuff. So a lot of interesting technology on that day. But we will flip through these, and really quick, if you can speed read, you can pick up what some of the major topics that are covered during the program itself. Soil health is a major component because obviously residue not only helps to keep moisture in the soil, but promotes soil holding capacity based on the health of the soil itself. And so it's a big part of things. Cover crops, crop rotations, irrigation scheduling, and so that's where we get into all the different technologies, with the forward-looking things that forecast using weather data, but then also hard data that comes from soil moisture probes and other technology. In this case, soil moisture probe on the left, and on the right, a crop stress monitor that actually measures the contraction and expansion of the stalk in microns. I'm not a scientist, whatever microns are. I just know it's small changes, okay. Weather stations and custom irrigation scheduling information is also brought into the picture as well. We have a day on systems, center pivots being the main system, but then also subsurface drip irrigation, which we have, and they are able to demonstrate at the Water Conservation Center. And moving right along, as I mentioned, the pivots and the subsurface drip, PMDI, the precision mobile drip irrigation, where the hose is actually dragged behind the pivot rather than dropping the water onto the ground. It's basically like a drip or a seeper hose that is dragged behind the pivot. Systems and special topics, that's the last day, and the picture here is of a variable speed drive, basically, and so we've got variable frequency drive, and oops, I went too fast. Anyway, so what we've got there is an electric motor, and in the box is the variable frequency drive, which basically creates consistent pressure and flow to the system itself. And drones being used to check crop condition, but also equipment. So really a wide range of topics that are covered. These are our graduates. They each get a certificate, and then, as I said before, are eligible then for special EQIP funding that was set aside by NRCS. And so, again, these things don't happen without a lot of partners being very important and critical to the success of it. And that picture was actually taken in our barn with a drone. So I thought that was kind of cool. And so, yeah, ultimately it's great to get that recognition. So let's see. I think on the right side, that's 2012, and that was the 212 program, the Environmental Excellence Award for the 212 program. And then to be able to build on that, the success of the program, the award's great, but the actual success of the program in teaching important information. It was great to be able to then be recognized again this year for the Master Irrigator. All of our private partners, so great to have industry actually involved and supportive of what's going on with the program as well. So all I can say is that we've had a meeting on that of our project advisory committee that includes growers and industry and academia and government, and we will continue to do this. It actually was a 4-year program. There was funding for 4 years, but we'll be going forward to continue to do it. And I think I'm done. So if you have any questions, catch me later. Thank you.
Jason Coleman is up next, and while he's making his way up to the podium to give you a good program, I want to say that we're learning how to do more with less up there. Cotton's got a great success story to tell. When I started farming in the 70s, the unit of water that produced 1 pound of cotton now produces 3 pounds of cotton, and that's great. The great thing about West Texas or the High Plains is that I can get in my car and push my GPS button, get out on the highway, and it'll say, in 117 miles, turn left.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to share with you some of the successes in Kirk. That was a great overview for certain. The topic that I'm going to share with you, I'm going to present in a little different manner than I'm probably most comfortable sharing it. I have presented information about this topic on several occasions to different groups within our water district. But I want to present the information in a little broader context and hopefully more commensurate with this part of the program discussing innovation and creativity in water supply development and innovation. And so I want to indulge you for, or if you'll indulge me for the short 18 to 20 minutes, hopefully this will stir some thoughts in your minds as you leave and as we all continue our work in this field in evaluating different potential advancements in this area. I want to tell you this story, and in order to, I think, share this story with you appropriately, I need to describe the setting for the story as well as the subjects in the story. So High Plains Water District was confirmed by voters in September of 1951. That followed an important piece of legislation in 1949, the Groundwater District Act, some provisions of which and some quotes from that are shown here for your reference and your information. The voters in the area were allowed to cast their vote as to whether or not they wanted to be part of a self-governing organization in management of underground water and charge themselves a tax. And those which chose to be a part of the water district initially are shown in the highlighted portion on this illustration. Now that was in September of 51. The board of directors, we have 5 which are elected, established some advisory groups within the respective counties in the water district, and using the feedback from those various committee members in 1953, in February of 1953, adopted some rules regarding the elimination and prevention of waste, also relating to the records for the construction and completion of wells, and rules relating to the spacing of water wells. Of course, over time in this story, things do change, and after decades of different events and annexations, the area in blue is now representative of the borders of our district. It's about 7.5 million acres and goes from southwest Amarillo to south of Lubbock down in Layne County. We're also now part of a community, if you will, in groundwater management across the state, as we have 90-plus colleagues that are engaged in the same difficult task that our organization is. We are governed, of course, by Chapter 36 of the Water Code. We're funded through ad valorem taxation, and we have a budget that's close to $30 million. As far as some of the particulars, if you will, within our water district, at the time that the district was created, largely an agricultural landscape. That does remain the case today, but certainly there have been many changes. We do have 48 mostly rural communities, many of which are probably very similar to communities where you may have grown up or may today reside. The population within the water district is a little over 500,000 people, 230 or so thousand of which reside officially in the city limits of Lubbock. Lubbock County itself, though, when taken as a whole, approaches 300,000 people. As I mentioned, it is certainly a very agricultural-based area. Cattle feeding, dairy are also very important industries, very much vital to the health of our communities, the schools, and associated agribusinesses that are dependent on those. And many of you are aware, and Kirk did a great job of covering this in our area as well. Irrigated production is certainly a big component. Total, that is dry land included, about 3.5 million acres are in row crop production in our area. So over the years in this story, as many of you are also involved in groundwater districts, we have Likewise, seen a number of different studies and research projects relating to our aquifers and understanding them. We have taken many decades of annual water level measurements. We have poured out our efforts into conservation education, and many of the same goals are shared by our colleagues here today. In doing this, we've issued over 60,000 water well permits under the rules of the Water District as well. And as times have changed and different processes like regional water planning have become part of the landscape, we've participated in those activities as well. Now, the other subject in this story is actually Xcel Energy, a wholly owned subsidiary of this company, a Southwestern Public Service Company in Texas and New Mexico. But the setting for the story is Lamb County in Texas, and Lamb County is just northwest of Lubbock County. And within Lamb County, in the upper half of the county, you might say, you see the landscape as we are able to somewhat visualize it from a satellite imagery perspective, where you have what appears to be ranch land here in the southern part of this illustration, and then just on the north part there you do see some irrigated production. This area of the county is referenced as the Sand Hills, and I can show you why here shortly. But it's a geographic feature. It's a delicate area as well, and it can be quite pretty. But there's two facilities that I've shown here in the setting for this story. To your left, on the west side of this, is the Tolk Station. It's a coal-fired station, a little over 1,000 megawatt facility. And then on the east is the Plan X station, which is the oldest of the two. It's comprised of 4 units. It's fired by natural gas. I think the first unit came online in about 1952. The Tolk Station has 2 units. The earliest was brought online in about 1982. So that's the setting for the story from the perspective of the second subject. Interestingly, to also give you a little of a bird's eye view of the setting for this story, both of these photos, by the way, were taken from atop the boilers at the Tolk Station. Again, that's the coal-fired station on the west side of our setting. And you can see the grass, the rangeland, if you will, that is prevalent in this area. We were fortunate the day that this was taken, actually several years back, to have a brief rainstorm come over us, and the backdrop of the clouds and all was pretty interesting to view from that vantage point. Now, interestingly, the second subject in our story, that is Xcel, also from a timeline is eerily close to the first timeline that I shared with you relating to High Plains Water District. So one of the real instrumental people in this whole story is a senior water resource analyst with Xcel, and he's in Denver. And I've visited with him quite frequently during the course of time, the time that I've spent at High Plains Water District. And I shared with him my perspective on this discussion to share with you today. And I told him I was missing a few things. I didn't feel like it really flowed well. And he started sharing with me a few of the things that I just found fascinating, and I think and hope for you all does link the story together. But in 1949, SPS at that time had a hydrologic study conducted for the potential water resource availability in this area, of course, for what would have been Plant X at that time. And the recommendations in this report were summarized, if you will, by saying something of this sort. You need about 10,000 acres of water rights in order to support this facility long term, okay? So over time, as you can tell and you might imagine, with the advent and the production of groundwater increasing, they have greatly expanded their water rights to about 52,000 acres. And interesting in this discussion, it's been mentioned in earlier talks, a good part of this is separate from the surface ownership. So they have purchased water and do not own the surface across a good portion of this acreage too. But that's been practiced in this example for decades. They have expanded, of course, their water supply system to 80 plus water wells. We're using the Ogallala Aquifer here, by the way. And the current combined usage between that Plan X station and Toke is about 14,000 acre feet per year. The recycling technology has certainly advanced over time. The water is used through the system on the order of 7 to 8 cycles before it is put into evap ponds. They have a no discharge permit. On another note, this is a separate station of theirs, but just to share with you some of the innovation and advancements, actually one of their stations in Lubbock uses reclaimed wastewater from the city as its water source. Now this is a big area. East to west, covers about 25 miles across this contiguous area of their water rights holdings. And over time, declining well yields, as many others experience, have also been part of their adaptation. The saturated thickness in the Ogallala Aquifer in this immediate area of interest is about 40 feet. Interestingly, across our entire water district, an average saturated thickness in the Ogallala is a little less than 60, okay? 56 is probably the number, but that gives you some idea of the condition of the aquifer. Now, as I mentioned, over time, many different practices employed in adaptation to water availability, water technology, and all. And typically, the answer, not just in this example, but for others, in declining water availability is a myriad of options, okay? One of those options is adding more wells, okay? And that typically has been seen in this example for many years, which was primarily true until about the late fall of 2016. And I got a call from one of the staff members at Excel, and he said, we need to add another well. And I said, okay. They had already obtained several other permits, and he said, but this one's a little bit different. I'd like to come down and visit with you. And I said, okay, that sounds great. So in November of 2016, this gentleman and several others from their organization said, here's the situation, declining well yields, more pipeline, more water rights. We've exercised all of these different options, but we want to apply for another water well permit. The only difference is we want to lay this one on its side. I said, okay. So there was a good bit of supporting information in this discussion. They had certainly done a lot of work up to this point and shared with us some of the explanatory information, some modeling results. And basically, the concept was we want to construct this well horizontally, have a 500-foot horizontal screen section. And the analysis which was presented compared this type of system to multiple traditional wells, if you will. And, there was admittedly concern about the outcome on their end. Will this work? Will it be successful? And so there's acknowledged uncertainty in the whole process. So they said, again, we need to work with you all because we need a permit for this type of well system. So that was in November, and January, I think, there was a meeting with a couple of our board members to also lay out this concept and express some eagerness to cooperate and be a good partner in this endeavor. So luckily it didn't take long. We were able to be flexible, you might say, and apply the existing spacing requirements for the water district to the horizontal section, which I'll show you shortly. And so in February, we got them a permit issued, I think. We had an agreement between the two parties to install some monitoring wells. And then we subsequently followed up in a collaborative effort with their communications team to make sure that we were telling the same facts of the story and not using conjecture and speculation. We, as a water district, also shared with our county advisory committees this information early in that year in order to educate them about this innovative project. Also gave us a chance to, in this time, evaluate different properties in the aquifer. You know, what are the hydraulics of a trench? and how does that work? And so the second illustration actually has 4 separate figures on it. This top left is kind of zoomed out to a county level. The blue is the entire extent of their water rights, and then the red rectangle is the area of interest. So when you get close in, you see the rings that look more like a paper clip, and when you zoom out, of course, it gets a little smoother. There was a water well they did abandon down here in order to meet the spacing requirements of the water district. The monitoring well locations are shown here. They're 150, 250, 350, and 450 yards from the screen section. I mentioned the Sand Hills designation. This is why there was a grass fire here about a year ago, and that country really moves around when it's not protected. So just a few facts and figures right quick. From the entrance to the exit's about 2,300 feet. The screen section's 195 feet or so below the land surface. 12-inch casing with a 10-inch screen. It's continuously operated. That's been a topic of discussion in certain meetings of our organization and colleagues. This runs all the time. You know, electricity's generated around the clock. And all the monitoring wells are about 6 feet of total drawdown at this point in time. So I'm going to leave you with a few questions. I'm not saying that every step of this process has been the model of doing everything right. You know, from me individually to the water district per se, but it's been very interesting. You know, how do we respond to innovative thinking and creativity? Is our immediate thought, well, we need more rules, or we know we got to do something here? What is that like? It's certainly, I think, expected that as current water resources continue to decline, we're going to have more creativity, and we're going to have more innovation. And how do we respond to these things? I will say that innovation and creativity drive resiliency for sure. We've had opportunity to look at multiple studies over the years about the life of the aquifer, for instance, in our area since it's been developed and monitored for 60 some odd years. And projections of such availability invariably are off. You know, there's a period of rain or innovation or adaptation or something that lengthens the life of these water resources. Last thing, I'm going to leave you with this quote. You may have at some point, maybe in grade school or at some other point in your life, read A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. And in another book, she offered this quote: "Creativity is a way of living life no matter our vocation or how we earn a living." So water suppliers, water managers, all of us have some creativity, and hopefully we use that in a responsible manner and in a way that leaves a good and lasting legacy. Thank you.
I think I must have been absent the day they taught creativity in school. But making his way up next is Scott Ikard, USGS, and we'll welcome your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Ikard with the U.S. Geological Survey. I'm here with Mitchell Sodek, the General Manager of Central Texas Groundwater Conservation District. And today we're going to talk to you about a geophysical study that we've done on the granite gravel aquifer. And so our talk is titled Visualizing Your Aquifer Using Geophysical Characterization at Multiple Scales. And so we're gonna tag team this presentation here. So I'm just gonna sort of go over what we're gonna talk about. I'm gonna let Mitchell take the first few slides to introduce you to the site and to the aquifer and some of the background on that aquifer. And then I'm gonna go ahead and take over and talk to you about the geophysical work that we have done. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to set the stage where we're at and why the district wanted to undertake a visualization project and how we're going to use this. So Central Texas is located in Burnett County. It's just west of Austin. It's a little over 1,000 square miles. When our population is increasing, we're approaching the 50,000 mark. We have a very unique setup. We're in the hill country, and we have portions of all 5 of the highland lakes along the Colorado River in our county, and so we're blessed with surface water, but we also have a unique setup with groundwater in that we're on the eastern edge of what's called the Layne uplift, and that has left us with some very unique aquifers. We have 6 aquifers, and some of those have sub-aquifers to them, so very complex area. We have 3 minor aquifers defined by the state as part of the Layne uplift, and 1 major aquifer. And then we have local water-bearing formations that are not defined by the state, but they're very important to the local area, and that's one of those is what we're going to be talking about today. And our district, our board, has been very pro-science. We've heard many talks at this conference and previous conferences about we need the science to develop the policy. Well, that's exactly what our district is setting out to do. And you'll see with this project how we did that. So this is a simplified geologic map of the Layne uplift. This is all based on geologic time frame. So the Layne uplift, for those that don't know, is a geologic anomaly where Precambrian rocks have pushed up, centered around Llano County, and has exposed all these older formations. And the one we're going to be talking about today is part of the Precambrian formation, primarily the Town Mountain granite. And we have deemed this aquifer the granite gravel aquifer, and we also have a granite aquifer. And both of those can be found in a formation called Town Mountain granite, which is the same rock that is used to build the Capitol. I saw it in the restrooms here at the building. It was on the tile and the countertops. That pink granite, that is the Town Mountain granite that we're looking at in this project. And what's very unique in our area is that parts of it have decomposed over geologic time from water, and parts of the minerals of the rock have decomposed and essentially left void spaces. And that's what we call the gravel, and it's mostly a semi-consolidated state to where you can dig a hole with a backhoe and the walls will remain vertical, it won't slough off. But if you take that material from the backhoe, you can literally take it in your hands and crush it up, and it will just get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's due to the feldspars and the micas being decomposed over time, and they're gone. And so that void space that's left, water is able to move through there, and at fairly significant rates. It has formed an aquifer with the solid bedrock that remains is the base of the aquifer. And our challenge then is that it's highly variable. So relatively speaking, this is a shallow system, unconfined, and let's say a 60-foot well is average depth. The deepest wells can be 100, 135 feet until you hit the bedrock. And it's highly variable in that I could have a well right here that's 60 feet deep where I'm standing, produces 50 gallons a minute, and from me to that wall, the bedrock can literally come up to the surface and be exposed on the surface. So over a very short distance, it's highly variable. This has caused challenges for people who want to drill wells, because I've seen many people drill 3, 4, 5 wells that are dry and not hit any water. And then lo and behold, they move over into one corner of the property and hit a 50-gallon per minute well. So that's our challenge, and we're setting out to use different geophysical techniques on the surface to map out the aquifer. And this is very unique because it's the same formation. So the gravel is Town Mountain granite, and the base is Town Mountain granite. So as Scott's going to show us, we're trying to define where that baseline is, to where the bottom of the aquifer is, where we can map it out, and also potentially we can share these techniques with well owners and landowners so that if they want to drill a well, they can find those deepest areas. And we have many wells in this area. This is kind of the area I'm speaking of in a little bit closer view. It's just to the north of Lake LBJ, just to the west of Marble Falls, and bounded has Kingsland to the western side of it. So a fairly small area, maybe 25, 30 square miles. But in that area, we have identified 1,300 plus wells. We probably have closer to 2,000 wells, with some of those being unregistered wells prior to the district. So it's highly populated. Most of that is domestic use. We do have some municipal use, primarily closer to Lake LBJ. And we also have agriculture. We have irrigators and landscape nurseries that irrigate from the wells in the granite gravel. So I think I'll turn it over to Scott. He's got the rest of our presentation and some good pictures, and hope you enjoy it.
Okay, thank you, Mitchell. So I'll start off by saying that this is a really cool aquifer, and it really allowed me as a geophysicist to sort of be creative, and in that sense I like the quote that you ended with there, because it's a good lead into this. So ultimately, as Mitchell said, we're trying to define the base of this aquifer. And in doing so, this sort of became a test where we throw a bunch of geophysical methods at this aquifer, and we get creative, and we try to see which one of these methods are capable of accomplishing our goals. And so our goal here then is to delineate this boundary where you see this sort of decomposed and weathered granite gravel aquifer on top of this crystalline granite bedrock. Here I'm showing a section of granite gravel aquifer, and this is roughly 50 to 75 feet thick. It's exposed in a quarry, and it just sort of forms a good basis for what you're about to see in the geophysical data, in that we have things like secondary fracture porosity, we have primary porosity that transmits a lot of water, and as Mitchell said, this aquifer is quite friable and crumbly. If you were to grab a piece of this, it would feel consolidated as a rock, but if you were to apply a little bit of pressure, you would see that this rock would crumble into smaller and smaller fragments, and so there's a lot of fines content in here. But so ultimately, I want to focus on two specific geophysical methods, and those methods are what we call time domain electromagnetic induction and then seismic refraction tomography. And so what I mean by tomography is essentially imaging, where we put some sort of energy into the ground and we get some energy back, and then we use that to image what's going on in the ground in terms of properties such as electrical resistivity, primary wave velocity, etc. So here's our study site. As Mitchell said, this is right around Kingsland, Texas. So here's where Burnett, Texas is, just for a reference. And at this site here, we have a whole lot of stuff going on here. So I'm gonna largely omit most of this, but I did want you to see it to know that we did essentially get creative here, and we tried to corroborate interpretations from these two methods, time domain electromagnetics and seismic refraction tomography, with as much data as we could get from other methods, because we really didn't have anything to go on. So what we have here is we have a primary survey area at this site, and this is an actual geophysical layout here, this black square. So this is 100 meters by 100 meters. So relatively speaking, a small area. And within that area, we have these white seismic refraction lines, and they're a little bit hard to see here, but these are labeled SRT 1 through 4, and then we have a fifth line right here, and I'll explain why that's there in a second. And then we have all these little black dots that are additional measurements of a method we call self-potential, and if there's some time, I may try to show you some of that specific data, because it sort of helps to make some connections as to what the seismic refraction data is going to show. But so ultimately our focus is on these white lines here, this large black square, and then these wells, the large black dots that are labeled A, B, C, and D, and the ordering there is just the order in which those wells were drilled. So that's what I'm going to focus on here, and the reason we have this lone seismic refraction line outside of our primary survey area is because this well was existing on site as we showed up, and there was a driller's log in that well. And so that really was the only hydrogeological information that we had to go on when we start looking at our geophysical data. So as you can see, in addition to the 4 lines we put radially from the center of our survey area, we centered a line on this well so that we could image what's below it and then plot the horizons, such as water table and bedrock, in that well log on top of that, and form an interpretive basis for this. So the first method I'm going to talk about is time domain electromagnetics, and I'm going to stay on this slide for just a second because I want to explain a little bit how this works. So we have this square here, and what this square really is a large loop of wire, 14 gauge wire, that we lay out, and then we connect a battery to this point right here so that both ends of this wire are connected to that battery, and we can transmit a current through that wire. In the center, right around where my well B is, we have, you'll see a photo of this in a second, we have someone such as Andy or myself who have set up with another smaller loop of wire that receives a signal. And so when we send an alternating current through this, and then we switch that current off instantaneously, and then we switch it back on and reverse its direction, what we do is we create an electromagnetic field. And that electromagnetic field propagates into the earth, induces current flow in rocks and the shallow structure of earth, and those currents that we induce decay as we turn the current in this wire off. So it's a pretty complicated process, really, but in a sense, as those currents decay, they create an electromagnetic field. And then that field comes back, we detect it with this wire that we've placed in the center, and then we can do things with that data, such as image the electrical structure of the earth. And so here's an example of what that data looks like, and I've included my map here. You're going to see this in a few slides, but just to give you a frame of reference again, here is Andy, our next speaker in the center. He's measuring the actual data, which you see right here, and then this is just sort of trying to show how we've connected this battery and stuff here. But so I have 2 plots here. One of them is data that we measure, and then another one is data that we produce from what we've measured. And so this plot on the left plots a parameter called apparent resistivity versus time. And that's time from when we transmit a current and then shut that current off. So as we shut it off, that's time 0. And so this property, apparent resistivity, it is how much the earth below us tends to resist current flow. And so in this sense, because, as I stated, because those eddy currents in the earth that we have induced dissipate in time when we shut the current off, they migrate deeper and deeper into the subsurface. And so on this x-axis here, which is time, this is really a proxy for depth. So later times, the currents that we have induced and which are dissipating have migrated to deeper depths, and we're getting apparent resistivities that change in some fashion based on how the electrical structure changes at depth. And I just want to make a note on these two plots that all of these axes are on a logarithmic scale, meaning that each major unit here is an increase in a factor of 10 in time or resistivity, etc. And so the black dots are the resistivity that we measure throughout this whole process. The red curves here that fit these black dots are what we model in order to produce this data on the right. And so what you see here now on the right is on my y-axis I'm plotting depth, and on my bottom axis I'm plotting now resistivity again, a true resistivity as opposed to the apparent value that we've measured. And in order to produce these black curves right here, which is really what we're interested in, we have to model this data by shifting depths and resistivities of these various layers to produce our data. And in doing so, we get an indicator of how that property changes in depth. And so, for example, right here, this vertical black line you can see is well, it looks to be a thick layer. If you consider this logarithmic scale, it's actually quite thin compared to these layers down here. But we have a resistivity value to some depth. In this case, this is 14 meters, and then the resistivity increases dramatically. And then between about 14 meters and about 150 meters, we have another layer that's defined by this value of resistivity, and then we have layers below that. And so I'm not going to talk about them because really we don't have any basis to interpret what they are other than to say that they are less resistive than the layers above. But so right away, we can correlate these layers that we see in this curve to features that we observe in wells. And so these blue dashed lines are water levels that have been measured. This one, I apologize that the annotations are a little difficult to see, but this one on the top is what I'm calling a historical water level, which was the water level encountered in this well on site as it was drilled. And then these other dashed lines here now are water levels that we actually observed in these wells within this area. And so it becomes pretty apparent when you plot those on this curve that what this really is seeing is unsaturated granite gravel aquifer down to a depth of about 14 meters, and this high resistivity kick here occurs at or near the water table. And I say near because we can't really tell if that is the capillary fringe or, you know, the effects of suction drawing moisture from the water table up into the unsaturated aquifer, but we're interpreting it as water table. And then this second layer where this resistivity increases and then is constant down to a depth of roughly 150 meters, this is a combined effect of saturated granite gravel aquifer on top of town mountain granite bedrock. And it's interesting in the fact that there really is no electrical contrast or apparent electrical contrast between the saturated aquifer and the bedrock, which is sort of counterintuitive to what we expected going into this. But you can see these sort of faint pink dashed lines here. This is showing where we encounter bedrock in our wells within our primary survey area. So right away, we can say that, you know, we can sort of map the water table at this site using this method from the surface. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our other method, which is seismic refraction tomography or imaging. And so this is just a reminder now to remind you of the layout of our survey. Everything is done, with the exception of this line, everything has been done within our survey area, and we've drilled 3 wells, well B, C, and D, to ground truth our interpretation of this seismic data. So I'm going to spare you the math lesson, but this is sort of important for a later slide here to understand how this method works. So at the surface, we have what's called a shot location, where we either smack the ground with a hammer, or you could use sources such as an electric spark, a shotgun, or some way to impart energy into the ground. And when we do that, we have this wave front that propagates out, and that's shown by these dashed blue lines here, into the subsurface and hits a boundary, in this case between granite gravel aquifer above and Town Mountain granite below. As it hits that boundary, depending on the differences in velocity or the way that wave is transmitted through this aquifer, things happen here at this boundary. And so I'm showing you ray paths. These are just essentially showing the direction of propagation of the wave. They are in theory perpendicular to the wave front. Some of these aren't necessarily perpendicular, but they're intended to be. And as this wave hits this boundary, depending on the contrast, we have a reflection where some of that is shot back up to the surface. We have a reflection into the lower layer where some of that energy is shot down into the lower layer. And then if conditions are right, if we have a velocity increase from one layer to the next, we end up with what's called a critical refraction, where a part of this wave now hits this boundary, travels parallel to that boundary, and shoots back up to the surface where we can actually detect it. 1 minute. Okay, I'm being told I have 1 minute, so I'm quite a bit behind here, but so I'm going to go ahead and speed through this. This is just a image of our setup. So we have a seismic source, we have a data logger here, a survey line with an array of geophones. We smack the ground, send energy in, and we receive energy back. And so there is our smack, and it really is that fast. I mean, in a matter of a few milliseconds, you see all these little squiggly lines on your computer screen. What each of these are is a time series of vibrations at each geophone in that line. And so you can see how at our source location here, these are our geophone numbers, these are the distances along that line, and then on the vertical axis we have time. At each one of these geophones you have our wave front arriving later and later in time. And we're interested in these red dashes here, which are first arrivals. We pick those first arrivals, we plot them versus the distance, and then we can model that curve, and we can produce an image of velocity contrast. And so here is that image along line 5, centered on this well, and our well is located here. I'm plotting elevation in this case versus distance, and you can see that we have some velocity contrast in there. So this is velocity in kilometers per second. From about 0.3 or 300 meters per second to a maximum of about 1.7 kilometers per second, or 1,700 meters per second. When we plot our horizons from our wells, from this well log, we have the water table shown here. This is the water table at the date that we actually did the survey. This is our historical water level, and then here's our bedrock. And we can match that to velocity contours and start to make an interpretive basis for the data we collect in our primary area. And so here is an example of that data, and this is now line 3 here, which has these 3 wells on it to ground truth it. And so here is some data above. In the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about this. But so ultimately what we do now is we find our locations of our wells that we drilled, and we start to plot the water table and the bedrock on this section. And you can see that our water table, this one here is sort of an upper and a lower bound that we received from our time domain data. The actual water table was positioned right about in here, but so our water table is fairly consistent at a fairly consistent velocity of about 1.1 to 1.2 kilometers per second. And our bedrock here is roughly within 10%. Actually, it's about 5% of what we interpreted bedrock. And so our black line here now is our interpreted bedrock from the line that we had positioned on our well that was already on site. And so that's pretty good. Typically you get plus or minus 10% accuracy, and we're about 5%. And so This is just a photo of our ground truthing here in this data. Unfortunately, we didn't see bedrock on this side at this level, and there's a very good reason for that, and we actually have ground truth that reason and determined that it does indeed exist. And that reasoning being, going back to my velocity contrast, if my velocity doesn't increase with depth, what happens is I do not get my critical refraction on this line, and all the energy is just reflected inside of the upper layer. And so here's an example of that. This is at a quarry. Here's the sky to orient you. And here's an example where we have a high velocity wedge of Town Mountain granite on top of a low velocity section of granite gravel aquifer. And so in situations like that, if we can get energy through this layer, which we should be able to, it would hit this boundary, reflect, and we wouldn't see anything below it. And so I'm going to skip that.
I'm so sorry, we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to have
Sure,
to...
sure. So thank you for your attention. As you can tell, and through this work, what we were able to do is map the water table, and we were able to see bedrock in a number of cases. And so anybody who wants to talk further about this, I'd be happy to discuss some of these methods after our next presentation. Thank you.
Nope. He had a bunch of stuff at the end, yeah. All right, so I'm going to talk about geophysics on a more regional scale. Hopefully I'll be quick and get you guys out of here so you can enjoy your lazy river and whatnot. Oops, wrong way. I'll be talking about work that we've done for Sandyland Underground Water Conservation District, South Plains, and UWCD Underground Water Conservation Districts. And they're all located in the southern high plains of Texas. As you can see on the map there, they're in the red box. And they are in Gaines, Terry, and Yoakum counties. We'll go a little bit about the hydrogeologic setting in the area. As many of you have heard other talks, this is in where the Ogallala Formation is at. It's overlying the Edwards Trinity High Plains and the Dockham Group. In this area, the Edwards Trinity High Plains happens to pinch out, and we're also looking at two different parts of the Edwards Trinity. We're looking at the upper portion, which is mainly clays and shales and limestones, and then the lower portion, which is your antler formation, which is sands and gravels. So we were asked by the districts if we were able to help them with three things. The first request was if we could determine total formation thickness of the Ogallala Formation and the Edwards Trinity aquifer system. The second one was if we could develop specific yields within these aquifers. And then the third, which I won't get into much today, is analyze water quality in the two aquifers. And then provide all of this information into a geodatabase, GIS layers, and a report. So to help answer those first two requests, we built what we're calling a hydrogeologic framework. What the hydrogeologic framework entails is we compile a whole bunch of drillers' descriptions, geophysical and lithologic logs, and based off of those, we can determine tops and bottoms of each of these units. Once we determine the tops and bottoms of these units, we can start delineating the structure in the area, and we can take those tops and bottoms and understanding the structure in the area and interpolate across them and make layers. And so we have surfaces for the tops and bottoms of these units, and from those surfaces, we can then calculate thicknesses. Also, compilation of aquifer properties from pump test, going out with new techniques, collecting new data. We can apply these aquifer properties across these thicknesses that we've calculated. So early on in the project, we compiled as much information that we could that was readily available. We went to like the GAM, used the GAM data, Railroad Commission, geophysical logs, BRAX data, the original source data from the districts, compiled that all together, and we have that point distribution shown in the map there. And then we did what we called a data gap analysis, trying to analyze what data we had available throughout the district area. And that's what you see in the blue. The dark blues was where we had really good understanding in that area. The lighter blues and the whites are where we did not have very much understanding. And so we went into those areas to get additional data to help build that hydrogeologic framework. And so as Scott mentioned, we used time domain electromagnetics to fill in those data gaps. I got an image here that kind of shows what's going on. We emit a current through that wire laying on the ground, and it creates the eddy currents in the subsurface, and we just measure the response of the decay response of those eddy currents. Got some field images here, and sometimes you don't get the best weather conditions while you're out there. Very rarely, yeah. It seems like the weather chooses to pick those days to be bad. So, as Scott mentioned, we get a data curve on the left-hand side. We fit a model to that data, and how you can relate that is very similar to borehole geophysical logs. As you see inflections in your model, you're going to have geological changes in the subsurface, and those geological changes can be related to changes in formation or hydrogeology. And so using that, we were able to get additional, basically driller's descriptions in locations where we don't have wells. And as you see in the map, we went and collected a whole bunch of time domain as indicated by the orange dots to fill in, and with that, we were able to get a much better understanding using our gap analysis. So, about the hydrogeologic framework, we developed contact layers from all of the driller's descriptions, the geophysical logs, the time domain soundings, and we did some collection in some boreholes as well if were able to find open wells. Based off of those, we created our layers and created an estimated thickness based on those contact layers. And this is a representation of what we built there. Got your Ogallala, thickness of the Ogallala, the thickness of your upper portion of the Edwards Trinity, the lower portion of the Edwards Trinity, and then the thickness of the Dockham. And then using the water level measurements created by the districts, we were able to calculate a saturated thickness in the Ogallala. I'm going to discuss a little bit about the aquifer hydraulic properties, how we're going to answer the specific yield question. Mainly, what you want to gather from this is that we want to know what the porosity is and the permeability is of the aquifer. Porosity being how big your pore spaces are in the subsurface materials, and the permeability is how easily can water flow through those pore spaces. So we went out there with, gathered some historical pump test data. We got aquifer specific yield and transmissivity from them. And then also we went out and collected flow meters, borehole flow meter information, which helps give us hydraulic conductivity and transmissivity. And then we also used surface geophysical and borehole geophysical nuclear magnetic resonance. Got a quick slide on how those are going to fill in our information. So we have the historical data, historical drawdown data, and the flow meter data can help us get transmissivity. We have our time domain effectively can help us get porosity in the area. And then NMR can help get us transmissivity and a specific yield. And based off of calculations and estimations, you can get all these parameters. I'm going to go really quickly over what nuclear magnetic resonance is. It's a geophysical technique that measures the water molecules directly. And how it does that, it excites the hydrogen atoms. They start off in a normal state equal to the magnetic field of the Earth. We inject a current into the ground and cause them to oscillate at a different frequency, or a different magnetic frequency. And then we let go of that and we watch them decay back to the Earth's magnetic frequency. And based off of that decay, we can we understand the properties of the water, which is very unique because this is the only geophysical tool that does just measure the water directly instead of the hydrogeologic properties as combined. And so this is an image of what we get from that. You can see in the middle part there, you can tell how fast the water is moving through the system, not fast, how much water is moving through the system if it's bound or unbound. Bound being stuck in a clay formation or whatnot, and unbound being if it's in a sand or gravel. So based off of that, from the borehole and the NMR, I'm showing some transmissivity values here. Go to the next one, and they're combined. You can see more towards the northwest, you have higher transmissivity as the blues. Towards the east, you start seeing lower transmissivities. So what that relates to, higher transmissivities, you have the more ability to move water, lower transmissivities, lower ability to move water. And then just an image showing all of the historical pump test data that we've compiled in the area as well. And then based off of everything that we've compiled and collected for this, we built a web application that's going to store all this data. Currently, it's got our hydrogeologic framework in there. We're going to incorporate all of the water quality, water level, and hydraulic property information as we continue on through this project. But what I want to show here is we have a direct point and click on this map where you can point and click anywhere, and it's going to build this hydrogeologic column on the fly. And I'm going to leave it to Layne here, who is from the South Plains Underground Water Conservation District, to help explain how they're using this data.
Thank you, Andy. Last speaker on the last day, and we're running over. Kirk, I'm the dumbest man in the room, I'll tell you. Now, I'm just going to say a few things. What these guys have done, Andy and his crew, they've taken all the data that we've really collected not over the last 25 years of our water district that Jason helped put together all that database, but from way back when the Texas Water Development Board was taking water measurements and stuff back in the 40s. These guys have taken all that data from our GCD, the Texas Water Development Board, their data that they've collected, the Railroad Commission data, and some other sources. And they've combined all that into a very user-friendly web app that normal people like Lindy and I and our two other districts. We're single county water districts. I'm the GIS specialist. We have two people in our office. So Andy and them what they've done with this is just make us look like rock stars. So it's been great working with these guys, and they've come out. with single county water districts, you're eating lunch with your board members, your constituents, and they've got water questions and stuff. And this is just another one of our tools that we can show them the work that we're doing, the science, so to speak. And with that, I want to wrap it up. I'm going to say thank you, ladies. Please stand up. Let's give these ladies a round of applause for putting this all together. And I'll get out of here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give this panel another huge round of applause. Thank you so much.